Mesdames, Messieurs, chers collègues, bonjour.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, good morning and welcome to the second half day of our symposium. For me, it is a great honor to welcome you today for what seems to be something highly interesting about research on heritage and digital. Yesterday, the presentations were high quality and the conversations and debates, discussions were very interesting too. This morning, during the panel discussion and the poster session, we will find out about lots of projects in this field, and it will be illustrated by the presentation of the IOLI platform at the end of the morning. Without further ado, I would like to introduce to you the third theme of our colloquy, i.e. from one technology to the next, deploying the opportunities of digital. And this roundtable, just like yesterday's, will be followed by Q&As and a conversation. Yesterday, it was particularly fruitful. We have the pleasure and the honor to moderate this panel discussion, to welcome Mrs. Marieke van Erp, who is a doctor in operational linguistics and who leads the digital humanity laboratory of the Humanity cluster within the Royal Academy of Sciences in the Netherlands, and she's been working for 15 years with cultural heritage specialists. Her laboratory is specialized in developing digital methods in order to push forward research in human sciences, using social sciences and semantics, among other things. So now, Mrs. Marieke van Erp, you have the floor. Thank you very much for this introduction. Welcome, everybody. I will explain what the objectives and the theme of the session are.
Projects in this session that you're going to be seeing are very, very different from each other. And we go from 3D modeling to music to epistemology, and you will really see what the current advancements have been able to bring us in terms of enriching heritage collections and bringing them to the audience. While these projects are very, very different, they also share very similar challenges in how to model very, very complex concepts, make them machine interpretable and searchable, and how to bring them to audiences. You will also see that some of the projects there, they have similar approaches of thinking about these things and share different technologies, specifically semantic web technologies. What we'd like to show in this roundtable is, what can we do, but also what do we still need to do in order to really bring these digital heritage collections to different audiences, and really capture the richness that they have, because these collections are truly amazing. So for the four presentations that we have, I would like to now introduce our first speaker is Antoine Lutkes. He's a researcher in machine learning and signal processing at INRIA. He's the principal investigator on the ANR funded project Camoulox. This project has already finished, and it was aimed at developing open source audio restoration techniques to bring real world sound archives to a wider audience.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. So thank you for this great introduction, Marieke. Since we have a very nice translation service, I will now switch to French to talk in my mother tongue. Merci à tous. Je suis très content.
Thank you, everybody. I'm very happy to be here today. It's great pleasure to have answered the invitation from ANR, who believed in our project. And I should take this opportunity to thank ANR for funding all the research that I will be presenting to you today, and in particular, Mrs. Sauvager, who followed this project right from its birth till the end of it. So I will talk to you about the Camoulox project. It started in 2016 and finished in 2020. And it is about audio in general, music in particular, voice too, and deteriorated old audio. On this slide, I have an ethnomusicologist who in 1916 recorded a song by a North American Indian, a Native American. And we have a whole large collection in France and also in other European countries of audio recordings. In France, since the end of the 19th century, we have sent throughout the world very great missions of ethnomusicology in order to acquire and record intangible musical audio heritage, and it is managed by the CREM, which is the research on musicology. And this is more or less the starting point for this project, because in the past I had colleagues who had in the past had contacts with the CREM, and the CREM's archives are quite large, about 32,000 at the beginning of the project, 32,000 items had been digitized already. They're all available online using very innovative tools. Considering when it took place, I can say that France invested heavily into this, not only for a bit more than 100 years, but also when it came to switching to digital. So that is the starting point, 32,000 recordings coming from 132 countries and 1,200 ethnies, for covering about 100 years. And there are lots of users for these archives, especially scientists, whose work it is, ethnologists, musico-ethnologists. We have about 2,600 visitors per month, and it is possible to expand. We can use this more broadly. First of all, we're talking about a scientific use, of course, which can't be argued against, and it is part of France's influence. And there are also lots of different possibilities, opportunities to use this collection. I talk about intergeneration exchanges, which would be to make this heritage alive again, bring it back to life by being used by musicians. But in any case, what you can say, what we can observe, especially because of the old age of these contents, most of the time there is a noise in these recordings. So we have to develop restoration tools. Where we're talking about the scientists in human sciences, ethnologists, linguists, or the public at large, these users have no particular knowledge about a sound processing and sound engineering. And that was the basic idea from the beginning. The idea was to provide the public with a number of tools which would be state-of-the-art sound processing tools. So it's a project with for young researchers. I walked in with some expertise in signal processing, audio signal processing, and the idea was to separate sounds. In the beginning of the project, we put forth some new formalism. It was a kernel additive models. And I shan't go into detail about these, but I'd like to make you understand what the aim of separating the sources is. What is audio separation? Imagine we have a recording with musicians who were recorded and their performance is carved, so to speak, burnt on an old record or on a magnetic tape. The point is that the sounds from every instrument are together. Imagine this man doesn't like accordion, so how could we get rid of the accordion parts from this recording? And in practice, technically speaking, we face this problem. Here, I have what is called a spectrogram, which means that from the left to the right, I have the beginning of the recording, and when I move forward, I see the spectral content of the signal. In the bottom, I have low frequencies and high frequencies on top. And you can see that with time, the spectral content of the signal changes, and it's highly complex. When you're experienced, you can see that this kind of oscillation is for voice. Here I have just voice, just vocals. A voice obviously is a natural instrument, and it's highly flexible. You can see that the vocal signal changes a lot throughout time, but it has specificities, harmonics. We have a very clear voice here, somebody singing, and lots of sounds come on top of these vocals. You can see vertical lines, the percussions, drums, and horizontal ones are more for piano, etc. This is the problem that we had to tackle. We had to move from this to the other one, to the other slide. We don't get rid of noise, but we get rid of signal, which is useful too. To tackle this, initially we thought we would develop these models with these kernels, but in the meantime, deep learning came in and it revolutionized the whole area, the whole field of research. So we decided to move to deep models for demixing, and the project was an opportunity for us to really establish state-of-the-art regarding demixing music or unmixing, with a lot of impact on our community, on our scientific community regarding sound. Also, we contributed open source computer programs. The philosophy was to try and use the subsidies in order to try and push forward the dissemination of these techniques to the public at large through implementing software programs in open source like MIT. And these implementations are quite successful. The products we came up with should soon be directed towards the public at large and also sound engineers. What was left for us to do was to find out how much and to what extent these tools could be used for the initial aim, which was to denoise, so to speak, these archives. And the second aspect of this project, which is transferring, was to use these methods for the CNRS archives. The starting point was the framework that was set up. And the good thing about it is that users can access these archives and see them. The problem was that it was not really possible to put in our calculations in the systems, but we used the system to get data back and then plug in ourselves into another system. I've kept a bit of time for demonstrations, for demos. So we developed two systems. The first one is which processes in the cloud, and it makes it possible for the user to unmix the content themselves. And the second one is on the internet browser, so nothing to install. So I'll show you a little demo. The first demo is unmixing a very old recording, music recording. You'll see I shan't talk over it, obviously, so that you can enjoy the sound.
If you take a rocking chair, if the blues don't leave me, I will walk away from here. Tell me how long have I got to wait? Left, you take a rocking chair. If the blues don't leave me, I will walk away from here. Tell me how long have I got to wait?
Avec certains outils qui se veulent le plus simple possible.
With some tools that are very straightforward.
Voilà. Et le bruit, pour finir.
And the noise.
Have I got to wait?
Et on peut télécharger les fichiers.
And we can download the files to use them.
Donc, ça, c'est un résultat sur un morceau de musique.
This is what we achieved for a piece of music. And I can show you the same for a recording of a voice, Edison's voice. It's another kind of model, and it's available too.
The original phonograph, a little piece of practical poetry. Mary had a little lamb, its fleece was white as snow, and everywhere that Mary went, the lamb was sure to go. Spoke in the original phonograph. A little piece of practical poetry. Mary had a little lamb, its fleece was white as snow, and everywhere that Mary went, the lamb was sure to go.
Voilà, donc on peut après affiner un peu le processus.
We can refine the process. That's what we're going to do to separate lines, so to speak, further.
Voilà, donc je passe à la suite parce que je suis un peu pressé.
Let me move forward because I'm a little behind schedule, I think. To summarize, the aim was to make advances in the signal treatment and also put online a number of tools to manage these archives and to be used by the public at large. There were a number of challenges: noise, deteriorated recordings, and precious, valuable recordings, and lots of works were involved. And I'll be very, very, very happy if you were to contact me if you're interested, so that we include these tools in some corpus that you would be managing. Do not hesitate to get in touch with me.
Thank you very much, Antoine. I wouldn't be surprised if you've got a few more users after this presentation. So let's continue to the second speaker in this section, this session, and that's Brigitte Ouvrivielle. She's a professor at the Université du Mans, and she's presenting the JPI CH Read IT project, in which digital humanists, human and social sciences scholars, and computer scientists have been working on an in-depth analysis of the cultural heritage of reading. Brigitte, you're still muted.
Thank you. Thank you, Marieke, and thank you everybody for having us today. We already had the pleasure to present the Read IT project in 2019 at a similar conference here. And so this is the occasion for us to tell us some updates of where we are now. So the Read IT, Reading Europe Advanced Data Investigation Tool is, the end goal is to e-search the cultural heritage of reading with a special focus on sources, textual and multimedia sources, but essentially textual so far from the 18th to the 21st century. And, sorry, I don't have the hand, I can't. Okay. So it's a transnational and interdisciplinary research program that builds a large-scale user interface to collect and analyze evidence of reading experiences and explore the vast trove of multimedia and multilingual testimonies. What do we call reading experiences? When someone is actually, whether on Goodreads or previously through letters or diary, tells about something that he or she has been reading and expresses an appraisal, the circumstances of reading, and transfers the benefits, whether in knowledge or in personal well-being of reading. So this is a very pending question in for humanist scholars working in especially book history and reading history, but it also goes far to documentation science and literature as well. So initially, our funding actually was based on building an ingestion and detection annotation tool as automatic as possible, leading to the identification of the main aspects of this experience. So can the tool detect who the reader is, from obviously from what is expressed in this testimony? So whether the reader says he's a man or she's a woman, whether there's indication of age, of occupation, religion, whatever. What is this person reading, whether it's a book, a letter, a newspaper? What are the general circumstances of reading, whether it's inside, outside, in the library, in vacation? And obviously the global response is how is this reading received, appraised by the reader. So the end users initially envisioned were essentially scholars who are expected to leverage these developments of their own for further manual text mining of the selected or uploaded sources, because in fact, you can actually search the sources that have been pre-annotated and that are in the system, or you can import, upload new sources that you want to process through the tool. So a little bit on the program history. It's 5 teams in 4 countries. In France, we're actually the project leader. We're dealing with the project management, curating the sources, launching and running the annotation campaigns and the ontology. Our colleagues in ERISA, CNRS, have been helping with coordinating the different strands of research, let's say the SSH side and the ICT side, through the workflow design. And they've also concentrated on image detection and NLP, especially recently in the last 2 years. The Institute of Czech Literature in Prague, he's in charge of all the use cases. It's actually quite complex because we're dealing with multilingual historical sources. So far in 5 to 6 languages. There's French, German, Italian, English, obviously, Dutch, Czech, and possibly Russian too. So we have to accommodate all these different linguistic realizations of readers' testimonies. In OpenU, both the Arts Department and the Knowledge Media Institute, they're in charge of the data model of the dissemination and public engagement. And they're also building different interfaces, APIs, thanks to the SME IN2. And the Digital Lab of Utrecht University is in charge of developing the interface and implementing the tools. So the main research steps, you have them on WhatsApp. It's pretty step-by-step process. So far, we've more or less moved as we planned. First year was the general layout and especially the specification. There's a lot of explanation, discussions, conversations to have when you have people for so many different strands of research that want to co-construct a tool. Then the second year was more about validating the layouts, like the data model, a skinny version of the annotation tool, the guidelines, which we are now currently revising. And then the third year last year was more about launching big annotation campaigns and adjusting the functionalities, starting also a lot of processing, NLP processing. And this year, because some colleagues, especially the Utrecht colleagues, will finish their project by June, we're in a rush now to implement all the ontology and the APIs that are like a chatbot, my collection. And because with the project ongoing, we've addressed also not so much scholar needs or not just scholar needs, but also the broad public needs who has interest in finding out about how people read in the past and today. So there's a lot of APIs for public engagement events and that actually work very well. So these are 2 examples of sources to give you an idea, just textual sources. The top one is from an English author. The second one is an anonymous internaute on Goodreads. But you can see that in both cases, the reader speaks about a topic or a book that has been read, the circumstances of reading or the provenance of the book. the medium, whether it's a brown, black and brown, whatever, a paper or what is it, and obviously the appraisal, what the reader is actually taking from this reading. I thought interesting to give you just this example. Of course, there are millions that are unknown and scattered and insufficiently tagged, so that's our problem. But it also gives you an idea of how diverse and fuzzy the linguistic realizations of these readers' testimonies are. So that's the kind of challenge we are facing. What we intended to do, that was the initial schema we had presented. We're not so far from actually realizing it, but so it gives you an idea that you have here two sources of sources, one that are curated sources, the other one is community generated content, whether through social networks that we're downloading, whether it's community engagement, through public engagement activities. And all these sources then enter the system where they are enriched and processed. And then there's an alignment process with the data model using some search and queries, a system like Sparkle. And then the scholars or the broad public can explore this data through interfaces actually that are all included, one being a more specialized annotation interface, and the other one being more for browsing, uploading your own collection of either memories, stories of reading, so as a personal reader. Where do we stand now? Actually, so far we have a list of tools that are not all as important as the others in terms of work that they needed, but they all combine into what is going to be an open access tool for both scholars again and the broad public to investigate the cultural heritage of reading. So the main aspect is obviously, and that's most innovative, is the data model, the conceptual model of reading experience, which is something that so far does not exist. And we're trying to capture as automatically as possible, but also with the help of the annotation, who reads what, as well as what the effects on the reader's response is. We have a reading experience ontology. I'll show it in the next slide. It's been finished like 2 weeks ago, so bear with us about the experimental outlook right now. We have obviously an annotation tool for text-based sources, which will be the main asset of the project, at least by June, a crowdsource of experience ontology, and all these multimodal crowdsourcing platforms that actually you can already look at on our website. I'll give the address of the website later on, because we've already been running surveys like Reading in the Pandemic, and through postcards and chatbot conversations, and all these obviously help feed the tool with new sources, new data that needs to be curated. And machine learning for pre-annotation of sources, for example, named entities, and a sort of automatic lexicon that can be provided from the processing. So here's a static image. Sorry, I can't be as exciting as my colleague with moving images, but it was too complex at the time, and we just finished this. So that gives you an idea of what the ontology is. It's you can see from the colors of the bubbles, it's so far like 2 levels, several layers, but of classes. The main classes being the reader, the act of reading, the resource, the circumstances, and the general output, where we're trying to be as fine-grained as possible into positive and negative outputs. Through the process of this project, we've been, of course, revising and reassessing our objective and goals. So I'm not listing all of them now, but just some examples to give you an idea. At some point, because this is an SSH-led, ICT-driven project, so we were always like discussing with each other, trying what do we want as SSH, but what can we do as ICT? So it's always the balance between what we need and what we can do. And at some point on the SSH side, we started saying we want a more fine-grained, qualitative crawling and detection of the reader's response. That's very much needed, and so especially can we make a difference in a reader's appraisal between the emotion, the effect, the thought, the judgment. It's a very, very tough question, not just on a technological aspect, but just the research on emotions is something that is currently exploding, but not so far sufficiently developed for us to be able, but it's certainly something we want to look into. There were, on the plus side, unexpected side projects that popped up, like a contribution portal. So I hope you can see the end of the URL of the Rti project.eu. On my screen, I can see the faces of my co-speakers. But there's a current reading during the pandemic inquiry and survey. So everybody is invited to participate, as well as the chatbot, so far in 3 languages, Italian, French, and English, but there will be more. The interface is, again, the core of this project, and our Utrecht team has been doing an amazing work. And for example, recent upgrading are listed here, but there are many, many, many more tools and features that will come. Just to point on the last mention, Dutch, Italian, and Czech are now available, but the French, English, German, and Italian are already in the system. Just as a quick screenshot of the current annotation tool, on the left side, you have suggestions. So you type in a search, a query. Let's say you're looking for a philosopher, 19th century philosopher discussing truth, for example. And so the tool will suggest you look at Victor Cousin. And then you can, using the annotation categories on the right side, you can annotate the text in the middle, and so select the categories that, and of course there will be some machine learning system that then will teach the machine to recognize that from the pre-annotated sources. Just to stop my conclusion, the big thing about this project, and we're still very excited about what we achieved, is obviously to allow for novel explorations of massive and previously unknown accounts, especially by ordinary readers. There's a lot that is known by famous readers, you know, classical authors who actually comment about their reading. But ordinary readers, the perspective of the history of below and popular culture is something that is not so much known. So this will be an asset. The NLP processing is still going on, but it's very, very, very helpful. And I know my colleagues from the consortium that are actually could answer questions on the chat later on. What we are now at the step is that we can now further use this tool already, although it's not yet delivered, but we can already use it for further projects on emotions of readings, on transmedia, and actually also more on the metacritical aspect, discuss collaborative annotations. And here you have an example of what it looks like when you're annotating. Just to finish it, at the beginning of the project, we had in mind to try to detect concepts from images as well. And we did devote about 18 months of the project with a researcher at IRISA and a postdoc to trying to find out to help a computer find at least a book, because so far computers can hardly make the difference between this booklet and a Mexican rap, for example. So, and so the idea was, how can we approach concept detection? And they have been working on trying to adjust to the proximity between the figure, the reading figure, and the reading matter. So all they have been trying to work on and to narrow down is this connection between the hand and the booklet. Obviously, it's still very much off limits, but we hope we can do that later on at some point. So thank you for having us. Please visit our website, because you have tons of information about what we're doing, what is currently being happening on the website. And again, all the consortium or many members should be able to supplement what I've been briefly presenting now in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this interesting presentation, Brigitte. And I think it really speaks to...
Merci beaucoup pour cette présentation, Brigitte. Je pense que ça parle vraiment à l'équipe.
You know, we live in such a weird time, and reading has definitely been affected by that as well. I'd like to introduce our third speaker of today's session, and that's Florian Laroche. He's an assistant professor at École Centrale de Nantes, and he'll tell us more on how 3D modeling and semantic web technology come together in the ANR-funded Reseed project. Florent, you're still muted.
Bien, bonjour à tous. Je suis ravi d'être parmi vous aujourd'hui pour vous présenter notre projet de recherche.
Good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to be here to present our project called Reseed.
J'essaie de passer à la slide d'après.
Let me try to move to the next slide, but it doesn't seem to be working. Ah, here. Oh, it was too quick. Thank you very much, Marieke, for this introduction. Thank you to the organizers, ANR organizers, for inviting me to this, which is semantic reverse engineering of digital heritage objects. As just like Antoine before, I work in a digital science laboratory. There are 450 researchers working on automation, IT, engineering, and I've been also collaborating with social science researchers. Reseed is a bit peculiar, and that's why I'm here to come here and tell you about it all. It's a PRC, which is a research project involving companies. And we're lucky at ANR to have 2 companies taking part in this project. And it's a way for me to encourage all the people to think and tell them, do have partnerships with companies. You can do things with manufacturers. So our project gathers 4 laboratories and institutions in more or less engineering with a company called Delta CAD. And there are also partners from human and social sciences, one at the University of Nantes, the Laboratoire Saint-François, and the inventory of the Ministry of Culture for case studies, and also another one which is as an advisor for World Heritage, and we have the Conservatory of Arts and Trades. So lots of people can, all these handle data and semantic data, and DeltaCAD normally works with companies, hard science companies such as plane and car builders who manage huge clouds of data. So semantic retro conception. I'll explain to you what these are. The idea is to be able to touch virtual heritage. And we all saw last year that we wanted to touch things, but we were in front of our computers. So if we can't touch people, we have to have things, we have to have access to things all the same. There are lots of objects in databases and in archives. Our problem with this is this. Sorry for the caricature, but how can a heritage expert, how can a heritage expert handle this object? This is an observatory. You'll see later in the case study I will present to you on the observatory of Pic du Midi. It's an astronomical telescope. This is a few gigabytes. How can we handle it on our computer? How can we index it? How can we add information to it in order to make sure that the object is authentic and is intact as well? Our postulate was this in companies. This has been in existence for a long time. It's called 4.0 industry. I'm talking about, for example, computer-assisted design, and without this design, we couldn't have made the planes we made. So the idea was to use these things coming from the engineering area to heritage sciences. The process we wanted to use is this, and as you see, this is a caricature as well. On the left-hand side, you have social and human sciences with a very straight pipeline, which usually leads to the little sort of battery, which is the database information inventory. And on the right-hand side, when we deal with physical objects that we want to digitize, then we can obtain a 3D model, so it's a little cube. What we see is that when we want to associate the virtual model and the database, we come up against a number of obstacles. The first one is interoperability of information and data, because we can have information in the database that will be absent from the virtual model. Take workers' struggles in Nantes in the 20th century. It's difficult because we'll have something for the whole territory, but on the other way around, maybe a 3D model won't have a semantic model attached to it. That was a basic problem. Where to solve it, we came up with that little sun. 4.5 years ago, when we imagined this project, we imagined something absolutely fantastic that could do everything. But we realized that it was impossible to have one single language or tool or approach. So we came up with the concept of a Swiss knife or a toolbox. I'll expand on this in a few minutes. But for the team to meet and get to know each other, there were 20 researchers coming from very different walks of life. When we say model in IT, is something with boxes and arrows that will turn into an algorithm. But in mechanics, it will be a 3D model. And if we talk with an IT engineer doing web semantics, the word model will be different. If you talk to an architect, the word model is yet another thing. And when you talk to a museum curator, the word model summons up other ideas. So the first piece of work for us to do was to get to know each other and speak the same language. Our project is goes along as capture, structuring knowledge, and then use of data. The object was to have a reusability of digital data. Why reusability? Because often we see that we can digitize an object for two particular ends, but when an object evolves, we talk about oriented reality. 4 years ago, there was no dreaming of using this kind of tool. So what happened is that new technologies come in, and the idea was to be able to use this new tool without having to turn everything that we'd done already upside down. So we decided to create an application just for our needs. So if we wanted to use another technology or use another application, we had to start from scratch. Instead of coming up with a great theory, we decided to use case studies. There are several. I'll give you two. The first one is the Scientific Observatory in the Pyrenees, Pic du Midi. The idea is that it's been in existence for 100 years, and it's a living object, because the objective of a scientific system is that it should be at the service of some demonstration. And there's a paradox, because Pic du Midi would like to be labeled UNESCO's cultural heritage. But it was not really possible, because a few years ago, a building was destroyed because there was no use anymore, and it was rebuilt to fit it with new tools. So we had to prove that this asset was unique. So as you can see, this object is large. We digitized it in 3D outside and inside, and we had a very large historical database, and we wanted to illustrate all the strata, just like in archaeology, in order to explain what this object is. The second use case is that of a scientific series, which is part of our national heritage, which is the meridian circles. There are loads of them. They're in Paris, Andaille, Marseille, Bordeaux, Besançon, Paris, and in lots of other places in the world. The problem with this series is that aside from maybe experts who know it, such as Jean Davoyot, who works at the Ministry of Cultural Affairs, how can we justify that it is a series? If you look at the Observatory of Lyon or Paris, how do you know it's a series? Well, we know because the same builder made these astronomical telescopes. So we decided to do an en masse digitization in order to make all the elements accessible. What you see here on the right-hand side is one of the prototypes that we developed. The idea was to be able to stand outside the observatory in Lyon and have access to that of Paris, and superimpose both and have access to the same information as though we were standing outside the one in Paris. This project was developed for an exhibition that took place in Musée des Arts et Métiers last year. It opened on the 15th of March, but we all know what happened on the 15th of March in France, and it was prolonged throughout the summer for a few additional weeks. The idea was that the public could directly with their smartphones access the prototype and use it just like I am now. For example, here, we can stream more than 40 gigabytes of clouds of dots. I have already told you a bit about our results, our outcome, because we had case studies, methodology, approach, and the results at the same time. Scientific results now, if I summarize them with this little drawing, I'd like to thank Paul Francois who made this drawing. The expert on the left is on the left-hand side. He can add information and create links on the corpus, text and 3D and semantic. I like it when I work with Jean-Louis Carandon, he's a historian. I said to him, I'd like to put you into a virtual system, and I'd like, just like in Minority Report, you to draw links between historical items. Historians now work with databases, but before they just had Word files. Databases are more complicated, so I dreamed that we could put him in the virtual system and he could handle virtually all the elements. On the other side, what can the audience do? The audience can go beyond the label as we have, i.e. a few lines, and the public want to consult information and access all the historical sources. And as you see, this will enable us to ensure the authenticity and the integrity of data, and the public can stand in the shoes of the expert. The expert will create the historical narrative, which is the real scientific result of an expert in human sciences. And this narrative should be captured and made available to the public. So we have this sort of Swiss knife with four main functions. We can integrate multi-dimension, spatial, temporal, granularity, i.e. Do we have a detail as small as a nail, or do we go beyond, the area and the city? And also we be able to capture heterogeneous data, and that's a very good thing in our project. I'll show you later another slide carried out by a PhD student that was funded by ANR and who came up with an approach designed to structure heterogeneous data. And this will guarantee the integrity of data. And then we'll be able to trace all the sources, and also we'll be able to adapt to all types of human-machine interfaces. And we must make sure that all the capital or all the information that we have capitalized do not fall into oblivion, but remain in our hard disks. I want to tell you about a project which sprung from our ReSeed project, and it will use all the technologies that we developed and applied to drama. And Paul Francois will speak about his thesis in a few weeks. And he modeled a theater that is more than 200 years old, based on very few data. He created a 3D environment based on all the elements he could gather, and then he created a virtual world which we wanted to be as simple as possible. Textures are not necessarily very accurate, but a researcher in history doesn't necessarily need very nice structures like in Assassin's Creed. The idea is to have the volumes, for example. Françoise Rublin and Jeff Reichman are two professors specialized in literature, in ancient French literature, and they are used to working with hard copies of documents. So we said to them, walk into the virtual world, and Jeff spent a whole year with that thing on his head to try and understand and draw hypotheses. It was very interesting to us because we could trace all the elements that he touched and handles. Here we demonstrated that it was possible to have a link with the historical database, which means that from the virtual world, you can touch the database, create links, add information and interact. And this really is dynamic, which means that what you do in the virtual world is replicated in the database.
J'avance un tout petit peu sur cette vidéo qui est particulièrement longue.
Let me move forward a bit. We have done experiments inside the virtual world. The audience was not in a 3D world because really some people are a little allergic to 3D. You can see in 3D, but you don't need those special glasses. And the public could watch the theater, the virtual theater being built, and then watch a whole theatrical play. So we filmed a puppy handler, puppies, a story involving puppies, and we reconstructed this virtually. And with the Institute of Puppies in Charleville, our project is to digitize in 3D these puppets and put them in a database. And based on a historical narrative, be able to have the puppets move automatically. It's a little complicated. So I'm told that I've soon gone over time. You will find all this work in Loïc Janson's thesis, who talks about the methodology from the capture information, destructuring of information in order to create information that can be used. I'll give you one element, which is what you have on the right-hand side, the tools that we've been imagining. As I said earlier on, we were a bit taken aback, we're a bit baffled because we could see that we couldn't make just one tool. So we have a methodology with tools, which we have a blockchain narrative with guarantees traceability of data. We have the capture narrative, which is a prototype. We have the I narrative, which will help us help you to see a number of historical information through augmented reality. It can be useful in archaeology. Just to show you that the results are huge, and I will include them in the chat so that you can have this information and access the prototype. I shan't show you a demo here, but do have a fun at home. So everything is available in the chat. Having said that, thank you very much. I'm sorry I went over time. Marieke, thank you.
I think it's really great to see how heritage can be brought to life digitally while people, for various reasons, can't visit museums. We're really running late, but it's all super interesting. So I would briefly like to introduce our fourth speaker, Bernd Ammon. He's a professor at Sorbonne University's Computer Science Research Institute, LIPSIS. He specializes in databases, and he's the project coordinator of the ANR EPIC project, which aims to understand the evolution of science through the analysis of big data.
Thank you, Marieke, for your introduction. I also would like to thank the ANR for the invitation to this symposium. So if I see it right, I have 2 minutes to present my work. I will try to do it fast. To explain our project, the initial motivation was to validate the different science evolution theories. So what is science activity? The idea is to describe science activity and the evolution of these activities. So if you take, for example, a standard science activity, which consists in defining concepts and hypotheses, and then to formulate theories and try to validate these theories using information generated by the observations and experiences. And within time, there will be new concepts, new hypotheses, and new observations which might change these theories. So there are various philosophers who try to explain evolution of science with different models, like Bayesian inference or the Darwinian epistemology. Mainly it consists in defining a theory, for example, as the validation of a validity of a theory by the possibility of its falsification, or to consider theories like in a selection process, which can change with the knowledge of with existing knowledge. And then there is also other theories from Lakatos, for example, who says that there might exist different research programs which coexist, and which have you have different concurrent theories which can evolve in time. And finally, Kuhn, for example, he considers there is some kind of normal science which can change, where people work within a specific paradigm which can change in time, and because it becomes incompatible with new phenomena like observations. So this is more like a philosophical motivation. I'm not an expert in these questions, but the main idea was to see if it's possible to use computer science to validate these kind of theories, starting from scientific archives. So the basic motivation is to see if these kind of theories could be explained using some notion of evolution signatures. So these are, we could consider it this like in parallel to like what we call a phylogenetics, where you look where you study the evolution of biological entities in some process, and you can see that some cells, some species can be separated into subspecies, or species could merge, which is less current. But in this sense, we could also consider science evolution as this kind of evolution process, where concepts can merge, concepts can split, and you can have some kind of a phylogenetic, what we call a philomimetic networks. So this is a work that has been done by David Chavellarias at the Institute of Science System Complex, and we started from this basic idea. So what are the project partners? We have the philosophers of science who tried to explain their work on evolution of science, and they also provided some case studies to study some theories they developed on the evolution of science. One partner was ISCP with David Chavellarias, who is like a institute where they work a lot on complex networks, and they also provide infrastructures to develop applications. And then there are two database teams, which is our team at Lipsys and the team at ERISA REN1. We are more interested in the problem of data modeling, big data, data querying, and analysis. So the basic idea is to build some systems that could try to validate these kind of theories I explained before. So the main thing is, the main question was to see if it's possible to extract theories from scientific archives, or more or less philomemimes from scientific archives. And the main question is how to transform text into concepts, and then how to align these concepts in a temporal dimension, and then how to exploit this information for studying the evolution of science. So we use different tools like natural language processing, machine learning, databases, and we try to combine these tools into a more general system and framework. So I will skip maybe a little bit, because we don't have much time, the notion of how to transform text to topics. So there are various existing techniques, mainly which consist in trying to extract semantic concepts from words, from studying the co-occurrence of words in text. So we are not experts in NLP, but we used existing techniques to try to extract topics from text. And I will skip these slides because we don't have much time. Mainly the idea is that we want maybe this workflow will describe it clearly. We start from a scientific archive like Web of Science, Archive, or Medline. we do some kind of data, some simple data pre-processing, like to transform documents into sequences or lists of words that are stemmed and that are normalized. And then we can decompose the archive into several sub-archives, so subsets of documents corresponding to the different periods of time. For each period of time, we can extract then sets of topics, and then we try to align these topics in a temporal dimension. So the main work in this project was to look at different techniques, how you can extract these topics and how you could align them in time. So that we applied different solutions. I will not go into the details, but I will show only some simple examples what we developed. So for example, here, this is an example on the COVID data set that has been published on the, I think it's on the Kaggle platform. So these are, for example, here, this is an example of a topic or a concept in time when we say that in January 2020, this topic could be extracted automatically from the corpus, from the scientific publications. So, for example, here the topic was looking at the problem of coronavirus infection, and they spoke about bats, and there were already some concepts that like the severe acute respiratory syndrome, and then it can be aligned with another topic in February, where we have a notion of clusters that appears, etc. And you can see that this same information could be considered also in much more detail. So it depends on the strength of the alignment links, and you could develop like more complex phyllomemies, and then you could also query these phyllomemies. So in ERISA, they developed a different model, which was using word-to-vec and hierarchical clustering to extract topics and then specific alignment techniques. And in ESCPIF, they also developed a different model. So we are currently, the current idea is that we want to compare each of these models to show what are the differences and what are the advantages and inconveniences of each model, and also to validate now concretely, because we can develop these phyllomemies, validate these with the philosophers of science, different theories they have developed on an existing corpus. We already have worked on this, but the validation process is still ongoing. One thing was to organize a workshop, but which was impossible during this period. So one thing we can do is, for example, we can query now the evolution of science, in the sense we could ask now questions like how did research on virus-related pandemic evolve during the last 20 years, etc. Which are the most relevant research topics related to the COVID? What are new research questions over the last 10 years, etc. So this is not as deep as the philosophical question that has been asked at the beginning, but already we can discuss about science evolution on a concrete structure data that has been extracted from large web archives containing millions of documents. So for example, here is a user interface where somebody could, these are all the terms and that have been extracted from an archive, and you can now ask queries like find all concepts where the term crystal structure appears in the past and in the future, or where the term COVID outbreak is decaying, so it's not appearing again in the future. So you can have very complex questions, like also on the structure of the evolution, if there is a split degree, average split degree of the graphs, etc. So you can, for example, it's only to show a last example of how you could query now these kind of phyllomemies. So for example, somebody could say, okay, for me, the concept of machine learning is defined by these terms, and deep learning is more defined on these terms. So we could query now the phylomemy, we can find some subgraphs, and now we can also combine them using some algebra. For example, what is intersection between machine learning and deep learning? What is different between machine learning and deep learning? And we can generate different signatures, so different patterns that can be studied by the experts. So to finish, so we have, in this project, we have mainly worked on different topic modeling and alignment techniques to see what can be done to generate concepts from text and how to align these concepts in time. Then we also have done a lot of case studies using many different collections on evolutionary biology, environmental versus ecological economics, glyphosate, COVID-19, and computer science. And we also developed several platforms and prototypes within this project that are more or less integrated. One prototype has been integrated in the platform GagonText, which is provided by the ESC Institute. So there are a lot of many other applications. I will not go into detail, but we can imagine that you can, for example, I was thinking about how this could be used for cultural heritage. One thing could be to consider, for example, when you have large collections of descriptions of historical objects, you could imagine that you could generate temporal maps that could describe what are the concepts that have been represented in different centuries, etc. So there are a lot of possible applications, and in particular because it's also visual for visualization of evolution in any kind of archives. So thank you. It was maybe a bit fast, but since we only have left 15 minutes, yeah, I will stop here. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very, very much, Bernd, also for being so fast. And I think the presentations will be made available afterwards, so people can see them again, and they of course visit the website of the project. So I'd like to, open the discussion out among the panelists. And I think one of the things that I would like to discuss with you is that, the concepts that some of you, probably actually all of you, are dealing with are quite complex. And some of these archives were originally created for researchers, by researchers, and they're very intricate. There's a lot of information, a lot of different dimensions to these databases. So how can you, for example, help users to get started on this? Like, I can imagine that something like the domain of EPIC can be a bit intimidating, perhaps. So how do you want to comment on that? Bernd, perhaps.
Sorry, I was interrupted by. So yeah, in fact, what I can say in our project for usage, I think it was one question was on that. One problem we have is, in fact, it's a very complex application. So you have a lot of tools, even simple AI tools to do topic extraction and all these things. And there is still a big gap how to make these tools available to experts. So this is one of the main problems we have, in the sense that if we speak to even people who know about computer science and are able to use tools, how to explain them how these tools work and how to exploit them to build, for example, a phylogeny. So what we do now, for example, to communicate with our experts, we build with them together. We have to help them to build these phylogenies, and then they give us our feedback, and it's an iterative process. So it's not an end user tool. And this is one of the, I think it's also the other project has this problem, that these are very sophisticated applications, and it's not easy to make them available to end users. So this is one observation, and which is still an open question.
I think, Antoine, this was one of the main questions in your project, right? So how to make this tooling available for non-experts and intuitive.
Yes, je réponds en français. Donc, effectivement, c'était le but initial de fournir des...
It was initially the aim. We wanted to provide sophisticated tools, sound processing tools, but we were slowed down not because not by our partners, but by limited skills and funding as well. What I'd say is that what's missing is a broader engagement, financial engagement in order to fund engineers who would be in the long term, who would be able to develop this kind of platform. It takes ages and everybody needs funding, but using little pieces of string, you know, we makeshift things. There are large infrastructures that entail huge changes in order to embed this kind of technology. Sometimes we thought that storage would be better than a calculation power, but at the end we decided to opt for 100% open source, hoping that in future this technology can be used, and the rest was made up of exchanges of IT programs between users and researchers. What I'd say is that there are lots of very nice wishes, but it's very difficult to materialize these wishes. And it is quite remarkable when it happens, as we saw happening in a number of projects today. But in order to experience it, it takes time.
I mean, I think it is, I guess this is the fate of being, of making cutting edge technology and working on these super new projects. And I was wondering, because Antoine, you started with several use cases. I think this also holds for Florent, because I also think that for 3D modeling, there's definitely, it's not a technique that lots of app or web or app developers comes natural to them, right? So is that also something that you've been grappling with in your project?
Alors c'est vrai que les outils de numérisation 3D, on les utilise de manière assez...
3D digitization tools, we use often photogrammetry and laser, and then the whole chain, i.e. processing the dot cloud. The basic principle was that the cloud of dots was like a 3D object. We didn't want to remodel things as usual, because we wanted to make sure that the object was authentic. But a cloud of dots is like stars in the sky. So you have thousands of dots, and they weigh hundreds, scores of gigabytes. I'm dealing at the moment with 3 terabytes. How can you visualize and handle this quantity of data? But we're lucky because in the CNRS, we have a number of research infrastructures. There is a DGIR Humanum, and quite a few members of my project are work there. What I'd say to institutions is make sure you are surrounded by researchers. Often institutions turn to subcontractors who will scan objects, but then the use, they won't do anything regarding the use. So I think it's good to have the researcher too will be a sort of mediator. He'll say, what is the format of your data? How will you store this data, and how will you make them lasting? I think that we all have to stay in our field of expertise. As Antoine said, we all have our own tools. What I often suggest to institutions I work with is you have the cloud of dots, but if you can't see them and read them, come to my laboratory and we'll be very happy to work on them.
Thank you. And I mean, I think there's, in terms of scaling up, there are all sorts of technological challenges, but I think also in reaching different audiences. So, I mean, we all know that some groups in society are more likely to engage with cultural heritage, and this even holds for something that I think we would like to think of as democratic as reading. So maybe we can talk a little bit about how you go about reaching different audiences in your projects, and then how we can expand on this going forth. And maybe Brigitte would like to start.
Sure. En fait, oui, je vais parler en français, c'est agréable de temps en temps.
Yeah, I'll speak French. It's quite pleasant now and then. I'll try and answer this question and at the same time answer the previous question. What we tried to do with Rti was to set up a mixed team which rebuilt with the end users, i.e. ourselves, the tool that we had dreamed up. It took a long time because there was a great need for explanation, and we just got to a concept evidence, a proof of concept, then any real tool that could be used by users. But we can see that taking time building this tool for which there is no existing technology, or the cultural heritage objects are difficult to grasp. If it takes us longer, if we take longer to find the right technology, we stand more chance in the long run to come up with a tool that will be usable both by researchers. We will have it, but we'll have to go on developing it. And I think that my colleague Derisa Guillaume from IRSA must be online, and this really is his job, because he's a computer scientist and he's highly interested in sort of niche projects for which very large multimedia infrastructures and large producers such as Google for tools and multimedia and automatic processing of languages. These produce mainstream tools, but which are not adapted to the fineness of our objects, for example. Now, when it comes to reaching out to a broader audience in the community of people working on the history of books and reading, there's the public at large, you, me, who are readers. And it is through the public engagement events that we can engage the public and associate the public, include the public into research, i.e. do crowdsourcing, take part in research in order to grow our data. So this area is really developing and evolving a lot. I'd like to say a few words about Bernd's project. I have a great use for your project, which I find is fascinating. So I think that although it's a bit difficult to explain what this project is, as it stands, it's already usable. And it's fascinating, especially when it comes to the emotions theory. I will delve into this with relish.
Okay. Yeah, I have the impression that what are the general problems we are in general, what we see here and what we discuss is what we observe in general in data science applications, because we are dealing with technologies that evolve very fast with very large data. Very often we have to collect large collections, heterogeneous data. So we have all same problems like big data, scaling up and modeling, and then also the tools evolve very rapidly. They change, they are complex to be used. And I think so switching from this context to the end user and to build applications to end users in general, it's a long step. So we are looking as a researcher, we often look for generic solutions, but at the end these solutions have to be integrated into applications. And this is another job. So I would say it would be like, okay, somebody said it's important to work with industry. So probably we should try to see how our tools we develop could be integrated in existing software applications and industrial applications and in cultural, I don't know, in mobile phone applications. And this is something which is still not very, it's still not working. It's always like that. It's a large gap between doing research and then to make it available to end user. And this is a general problem we always have in these kind of applications. And I think this is one of my conclusions when you look at all the projects we have seen, and in special also for cultural heritage. Maybe if all museums in France, they develop some kind of platform and they say, we want to provide these kind of services, and now we work with researchers, and we have developers, we have a cultural Google or something like that, and then maybe we could advance on. It would be easier for promoting these kind of technologies.
Yeah, I think you're very right there, and I think there's also a gap there in the kind of how the funding streams work for these kind of different things. I think we wanted to do one audience question in between. Charles, correct? No?
I don't know.
Okay, so then we just continue the conversation here. So I don't have access to the audience questions at the moment.
Pardon, une petite remarque peut-être, c'est que dans le cadre de mon projet, en tout cas.
Yes, I've got access to the public. There is one question from the public. Donc que je vais vous lire en français, c'est Madame Joséphine.
I read it in French. It's from Joséphine Simoneau for Antoine for Camoulox. The question is this: how does the system detect the instruments to select, and how can you connect the service to sounds online? Thank you for the question. It's a little technical. The system has learned on a predefined list of instruments, so it's the user who chooses the instruments. And the second thing, we have two systems. The first one is in the browser itself, so you have nothing to install, and the second one is a client server that runs on a server. And so institutions have to give us the access to the data. And we can talk about this in more detail, but I think that Josephine played a great role in the Camoulox project, and I'd like to send her my regards here. I would like to point out that, as far as I'm concerned, the reuse for creative ends of the content of heritage was a very enthusing approach, and this raises a number of questions, i.e. the reuse of heritage legally. How does it work, for example, regarding music creation?
Okay, thank you very much. I think we could talk for another hour, but sadly we don't have that time. But I really hope that we can continue these conversations offline. I really hope that everyone enjoyed the presentations and discussions in this session. I think all projects showed that taking on these advanced digitization of heritage, it's really a multidisciplinary endeavor. And the projects presented in this session and in the rest of the conference show that these new technologies are already helping us rethink the organization and presentation of heritage collections. But at the same time, I think they're opening up a whole host of new research questions that will probably keep us busy for the next, I don't know, 30, 40 years, at least. I highly encourage everyone to take a look at the projects after the conference, to continue the conversation, get in touch with these awesome researchers, and make this whole deploying of digital technologies even more future-proof. Je veux remercier les présenteurs, le public et l'organisation pour une session très intéressante.
I'd like to thank the audience and the organizers for this interesting session.
D'avoir organiser ce débat tout à fait intéressant. C'est vrai que
Thank you, Marieke, for chairing this session. Obviously, some time is missing, and it's always a little bit like this in conferences. I'd like to thank all the people, the presenters, and I would like to invite everybody. I invite you to go to the poster site, and you can visit in the order you like. You can visit these. You can visit these posters, and you can talk with the project bearers. You'll see that we have very high quality, highly innovative projects, and you can complement the discussion that just took place by talking to these project bearers. And after this visit of the poster project, we shall meet again at 11:15 to find out about the hourly project presentation. So have a nice poster session, everybody.
Bien, rebonjour à tous et bonjour.
Welcome back to everyone, and welcome to those who have just joined us. We are here for our second part of this morning's session with a presentation on how we can enhance the value of our work through the IOLI collaborative platform. This is a project coordinated by Livio De Luca, who is a CNRS researcher and the director of the MAP laboratory for mapping and simulation of architecture and heritage. It's a hybrid laboratory with CNRS and the Ministry of Culture. Now, we're very happy to have two people with us from the Research Center involved in MAP and the GAMSU, which is the research group to apply scientific methods to architecture and urban planning. So there are a number of areas concerned here. Violette Abergel and Adeline Manuel will be presenting to us this project for the IOLI collaborative platform. And just like in our last session, you will have the possibility afterwards of discussing this with them, ask questions, and exchange for a little while, which will certainly be rewarding for us all. So, Ms. Abergel and Manuel, please go ahead for your tandem presentation. Thank you. Thank you very much for your introduction. I'd like to introduce myself, Adeline Manuel, a researcher at the MAP laboratory, and I'll be presenting to you our project IOLI with my colleague, Violette Abergel, who is a postdoctoral student working at the lab. IOLI is a 3D platform for semantic annotation. It's a web platform, 2D, 3D, and I'd like to thank the organization for offering us this opportunity to present our project. So this IOLI platform started out with the question of how to interconnect the geometry, the visual appearance, and semantics in an integrated approach. This led to three questions on three different topics. First of all, the semantic aspect. Massive digital techniques leads to a number of 3D models that are not interpreted, which means that we need to define innovative methods to help with the processing, filtering, and use of this data. Second, the issue of communications, because digital aspects are related to so many things in connection with the same heritage object. So you need to find solutions to collect, correlate, and share this data within a community of players working on heritage. And then the third question is interoperability, and in particular, how to manage the data and the necessity to have a flexible definition so that you can acquire the objects in different ways with different details, a general view, or just focus on a part of the object, what viewpoint, what temporal aspect in terms of how the object evolves over time, the description of the object also, and finally, you need to adapt to the various scenarios for observation and analysis, which can be very different. So, to explain more about this project, we started this through my thesis in 2012, and it's going on today in connection with other projects as well. It's a development of the application, and then we're working on pre-processing to use it elsewhere and use the platform in other ways. As I said, it's been since 2012. We've been working on this project with a number of people in development and with users that gave us direct feedback on use of the platform. This platform has been patented, basically declared with the CNRS, and we have received support from CNRS Innovation in connection with the RISE program. This platform as I explained in the first slide, led to the question of defining a common denominator from the design standpoint and the technological standpoint. This common denominator is the heritage object itself, because it is at the heart of the documentation process. And this means that all the observations will be made on the heritage object. It will bring all of the players together, the analysis of the models, and all of the documentary resources. This is why the platform is going to provide continuous information throughout all phases of the project, from acquisition of the object until the semantic annotation. And this is a continuous annotation system. And we can then we will work on the morphology with the description for the structuration of the geometrical aspects and the correlation of the semantic annotations. Finally, as regards the question of the flexible acquisition of technologies and scalable, we're able to use a cloud platform to collect, process, and share the data, both online, because it is a web platform, but also in situ, using mobile devices, for example, cell phones or tablets. Once you are connected to internet, you can use the platform. For the first point, having to do with the continuous process of acquisition, we worked on the spatialization of the images among each other using a point cloud. We use photogrammetric processing for the image, the position, the orientation in space of the object to define the distortion parameters, for example, and other data. Then with a 3D cloud point, we have integrated a software program, MicMac, in the platform designed by IGN that we are working with as a partner. This makes it possible to really exploit MicMac all the way through this project. At the end of the photometric process, we have a cloud, a point cloud, and then this allows us to have the images.
Il faut ralentir un tout petit peu, s'il vous plaît. Merci beaucoup.
Pas de souci. Alors, voilà. Donc, pour la photogrammétrie, il faut avoir...
For photogrammetric processing, you need a whole set of images to produce this point cloud. And then you have to be able to update all of these images without having to go back and complete the point cloud. So you have the possibility of doing this in two ways. Either you have a set of images with the metadata recovering that will make it possible to add them through the photogrammetric processing without the point cloud. But what happens when you want to add individual images, and especially without metadata? For example, images from archives. In that case, there are methods that do exist, and it makes it possible to add to all of the images in the point cloud these individual images. It does lead to a slight processing problem, but we are dealing with this. Now, why do we want to have this point cloud and the images around it? Well, it's because this allowed us to create a link between 3D and the images. And once you know the orientation of the objects and the distortion parameters of these images, then you can project onto the images 3D data. So for each point cloud, which you are familiar with in space, in the coordinates, you will have the image and it will be overlaid on the whole image with the associated pixels. This makes it possible to very easily move and shift to 3D. And so 3D provides us with all the geometric information we need generated from the point cloud and the view of the images. So here you can see the set of images generated on the point cloud, the depth, the computation, and the ambient occlusion, etc., which is projected, which allows you access to the image and all of the geometric information. The second use of this link between 2D, 3D is automatic propagation of different areas of the image. You can, for example, extract the related point cloud to this part of the image, and you can also reproject this area on top of all of the other images. So a user has to just select one part of an image and then will obtain the projection on top of all of the other images, which will lead to different points of view. You can manage, and this will allow access to the geometric data that is not contained in the images. So this allows us to go on with the second question about the structuring of the data based on morphology. You can select an area of the image, that's great, but you have to be able to describe it. So what we did was base ourselves on a model that is as flexible as possible, and that will structure the annotations using all of the calculations with the same model of description. So you have two different descriptions, and you can have two different models. This means that for each annotation, you have descriptors defined by the user. The user can have their own descriptive data file per copy, and then can customize it, define different types of fields that will describe the different areas of the image. Then the user can also use additional resources, documents, images, videos, even soundtracks. For example, if the user wants to relate audio commentary to part of an image, that is something also possible. And at the same time, when you select and extract the point cloud of the annotation, you will get the geometric descriptors, which are calculated automatically. So it could be the basic geometrics, the center, the direction or orientation of the object, its position compared to the rest of the point cloud, all the information on the geometric level I explained to you earlier, normal, argosity, or ambient occlusion. And for each annotation, you have access to all the other areas of the image and a spatiotemporal layer that in the end will allow you to manage the temporal distribution. And for the two acquisitions in different points of time of the same image, you can project them, say time 0, you can project that onto time 1, which means that in the future we can make comparisons in terms of how the object changes. Is it getting damaged? How did it evolve between time 0 and time 1? How extensive is the damage? Can it be corrected, amended? We want to document the image throughout time. And this, of course, facilitates annotation, which can take a long time. When you have thousands of images, you can't annotate each single image. So my last point has to do with the flexible and scalable technology. This is more on the technical level. We sought to have an system architecture that would be easy to scale based on increased workload, and we needed to have it reinstallable on new servers without too much trouble, too much work. Obviously, it can require advanced knowledge in this area. The user, on their side, everything is transparent, based right there from their computer. The user does not need to have a very powerful computer to do this processing for photometrics or the whole aspect of annotation. And the idea is for it to be easily accessible to all users and allow them to do the processing. This is necessary when you want to do photogrammetrics. It's an interface that we wanted to be responsive and used on new media and new devices such as cell phones with screens, or even with cameras that could capture this data. And it could be sent then to the platform using these devices. The only condition is to have, of course, an internet connection to access the platform. We have come up with an initial prototype. It was in 2017, 2018. We did some beta testing. We had some beta testers mainly throughout Europe who helped us in working in different areas. So this allowed us to test. We got initial feedback from these users about the platform, and we saw that use could be very interesting for a number of different projects, such as archaeology with aerial views, or buildings, and even smaller objects such as sculptures or smaller objects. Here is something integrated into the platform, and it can also help with restoration of buildings.
De l'étude stratigraphique en archéologie, ou encore sur l'analyse morphologique de fragments. Un des plus gros projets qui a été vraiment significatif sur le test a été la documentation qui a été faite sur le tableau, donc, qui est la crucifixion de Louis Bréa, donc cette documentation qui a été faite par le CICRP, qui est une des équipes du laboratoire MAP. Donc ils ont fait vraiment une documentation complète sur la restauration de la peinture, que ce soit avant, pendant, mais aussi après la restauration de la peinture. Donc ces retours d'utilisateurs nous ont permis vraiment de pouvoir améliorer notre plateforme et d'envisager donc une nouvelle version qui intègre des nouvelles fonctionnalités, donc notamment qui intègre un aspect, donc ce que l'on a appelé l'héritage asset, qui est en gros, qui permet de créer un lien entre les projets et l'objet patrimonial en lui-même. Pour chaque heritage asset, on définit donc vraiment la description générale de l'objet et on y lie le projet. Ça veut dire que pour un seul heritage asset, on peut lier potentiellement plusieurs projets. Puisque par exemple, sur un bâtiment, on ne va pas forcément faire une acquisition complète du bâtiment et charger l'ensemble du bâtiment dans le projet, mais on va peut-être le diviser en sous-parties, par exemple par façade ou ce genre de choses. Le deuxième aspect que nous avons intégré, c'est l'aspect collaboratif, puisqu'effectivement, comme je l'ai dit, sur un même objet, on va avoir une multiplicité d'acteurs qui vont intervenir. Du coup, on a développé des options de partage pour pouvoir partager donc, un projet et que chaque utilisateur puisse faire ses propres annotations sur le même projet. Voilà, on a aussi fait évoluer un peu notre interface pour qu'elle soit plus ergonomique et un peu plus facile à utiliser et que l'utilisateur soit un peu moins perdu. On a aussi surtout beaucoup amélioré la partie des fiches de description, donc ce que j'expliquais tout à l'heure, où l'utilisateur peut les définir de manière totalement libre. Et on a notamment cherché à intégrer un champ de description lié à un vocabulaire contrôlé. Donc, pour l'instant, les champs qui étaient définis permettaient d'avoir des champs libres. Donc, l'utilisateur, si on définissait un champ de texte, il était totalement libre de son champ. Là, l'idée est de définir un champ qui soit lié à un thésaurus, donc stocké dans OpenTheso, et de pouvoir limiter la proposition des termes pour ce champ uniquement aux termes contenus dans le thésaurus associé. Voilà. Et au niveau actuellement, voilà, cette nouvelle version n'est pas encore ouverte au test, mais devrait bientôt l'être, en tout cas on espère. Et Et elle est actuellement notamment en test dans le cadre du projet ANR Sésame, donc sur l'abbaye de Marmoutier, mais aussi, surtout, sur le chantier scientifique de Notre-Dame de Paris, où tout le diagnostic fait par la maîtrise d'œuvre a été reporté dans Aioli, donc où là, vraiment, l'utilisation des Heritage Assets est vraiment significative, puisque on a les différentes parties de la cathédrale ont été divisées en différents projets, mais sont tous liés au même objet patrimonial, qui est la cathédrale Notre-Dame de Paris. Et voilà, et on espère pouvoir sortir une nouvelle campagne de bêta-testing sur cette version-là au courant de l'année. Mais bon, voilà, c'est comme vous l'avez vu, l'équipe tourne beaucoup et généralement, on n'est pas très nombreux, donc on avance un peu comme on peut. Et voilà, donc on espère. Donc voilà, si vous suivez un peu sur le site du projet, donc que vous retrouverez dans le résumé du projet, voilà, vous pouvez suivre les nouvelles. Pour la suite de la présentation, je vais donner la parole à ma collègue Violette, qui du coup va vous parler plutôt des travaux en cours qui vont être développés donc dans le futur et les aspirations qu'on aimerait pouvoir apporter à la plateforme. Voilà.
Alors, bonjour à tous. Et,
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Adeline, for this introduction. I'm going to discuss the future prospects for this platform, technical improvements in the future, and the different plans Aioli has. I realize we don't have much remaining time left. So here's one of the most important aspects.
One of the most important aspects
which relates to sharing of data produced in Aioli and how to disseminate that. It's a major challenge in terms of interoperability, and there are a number of players in
interdisciplinary teams to work by doing semantic annotations on one object. But after these annotations have been created, how can they be used? We offer export functions, but it seems to me that it's not enough. Here you can see in this video how Aioli was used to transcribe the diagnosis done by the work owner for Notre-Dame de Paris, and then to produce the data, to use the data produced thus. We made it possible. We offer the opportunity to communicate, to make Aioli communicate with the digital platform for Notre Dame. What you see here is the 3D drawing that was made for the scientific site for Notre Dame, and it's supposed to gather all the data, i.e. clouds of point of dots, oriented images, hypotheses for reconstruction, specialized sound samples, and the idea was to have a connection with Aioli, to have all the semantic elements about the cathedral, especially regarding diagnosis. I would like to ask you the same thing, because our translators, it's very fascinating to hear you. You can slow down a little bit for our translators. Don't worry. Thank you.
Alors, je vais essayer de revenir sur cette partie.
I'll try and go back to that part of the video by establishing a link between this and Aioli. What we'll be able to reproject all the annotations in a variety of projects to all the other digital resources that represent Notre Dame, And this is highly interesting in order to put information back into context on a large scale, but also to start working on questioning heterogeneous data by building methods to do some spatial filtering based on purely semantic criteria. For example, display-only annotations are only resources that present a particular type of deterioration or regarding a particular part of the cathedral.
Alors, parmi les perspectives pour la suite,
regarding future prospects, there are also lots of issues regarding automation of processes. For example, another thing that we worked about is scaling and automatic orientation of the 3D scenes produced in ANR, because now the workflow we use for reconstruction makes it possible to manage the geolocal location of the project, but we can first go through a number of files with 2D and 3D images, but it takes a long time, and also it's difficult for people who are not familiar with photogrammetry. So to make this process easier, we're now working on a QR code system which contains all the information in the project and can be used as a reference to determine the axis and really keep the original orientation of the object. And these QR codes can be automatically detected in the input images and taken into account during reconstruction through photogrammetry. So there is no need for particular handling on the part of the users. Still, in the prospect for automation, another piece of work is to allow import of data from Mercurio in order to facilitate the inclusion of other projects. Mercurio is a startup company from the MAP laboratory, and it has this geodesical machine that contains lots of sensors, and it can very quickly very quickly digitize structures. We can offer direct import with also a customized processing system. So the idea, both from Mercurio and IOD, is to come up with protocols that will be accessible to ignorance in a way in the field of photogrammetry, but which will help them doing heritage analysis and documentation. Just like Adeline showed you, ILE makes it possible to annotate photographs in visible light. So the idea is to include a workflow of processing through photogrammetry that would be versatile enough to have multispectral images, especially on TACO, which is a particular engine for images. But we can't always see very fine details or very fine reliefs. In this respect, there's another type of images which are Rti images, which can be very interesting. They reflectance transformation imaging that they were mentioned yesterday. In a way, the 2D images that make it possible to vary mechanically the position of the light source, so we can see relief more easily, for example. I shan't go into detail, but you can see on the left-hand side a dome that is used to acquire Rti data, and LEDs come on one after the other, and there's a camera taking pictures, one picture per orientation or light source. So you'll have a picture with different lighting. This type of image is very precious in many analysis contexts because these media are very much used, especially for cave art and numismatics. We wondered how we could include this in ILE, but what's difficult is to spatialize these images, which can be integrated as they are in the photogrammetric process. But by using the average picture of all the raw data we got, and we can calculate a particular pose and orient the Rti image. We worked with the ISTI laboratory, and we could validate with them this protocol. And the picture you see here was spatialized and annotated within ILE, and the annotation was spread to all the resources in the project. We still have a few technical problems to solve in order to generalize our approach and integrate it in our version, but it will be done. Regarding automation, the problem has to do with making annotations. Now they're manual tools, but we have looked at semi-automated or automated tools which can base themselves on a particular orientation of the picture. In this case, the user can select the input he or she is interested in, one point of in the project, for example, and choose an orientation plugin. And after parametering by the user, this image can produce a number of regions where the dots share similar characteristics, and then we extract the outline, and then the user can edit the line before it can be sent to all the resources in the project.
This is the approach we took here with a simple algorithm and the point cloud. Once we've detected the points in the cloud, then you can reproject the image and transform that into annotations and copies. Of course, this is always possible for the user. You're talking about geometric aspects without the intelligence or the semantic intelligence behind it. Now I'm going to go on even quicker, and it's the same idea here with assisted or aided semantic annotation with a pre-selection, such as the magic wand. I think you're familiar with the magic wand like Photoshop, which allows you to select using the reference pixels, those pixels that have the same color based on a tolerance level. So it's the same idea here. We are going to allow users to select the 3D points which have the similar properties respecting certain criteria. On the left, you can see pictures of this. And by applying this approach to the 3D colors, you can select in just one click this figure painted on the object, and on the right you have the animation, so you can see that when it's applied to the points and not the colors, you can once again select and you just validate the edges and can propagate it. In practice, we need to improve certain things, in particular limiting the section to contiguous areas and the media used. It's a pretty easy image here, but it's a lot more complex when it's in 3D. In addition to technical improvements, we want to add new functions to improve the existing processing process. And in the long term, we have other prospects. We'd like to go further in the analysis. Here you can see the work done by the lab by Frederick Pettler, who is interested in the multi-temporal tracking of the study objects. The idea was several photogrammatic acquisitions of the images, and then we could use analysis tools to track the damage to the objects, and if we see material being lost, or if we see deformation or variations in color, etc., we can study them. This is especially interesting for conservation purposes. And in addition, it allows you to manage several acquisitions of the same object in a single shift, and this will allow us to compare and analyze the phenomena observed, for example, alterations of the object. And this will allow us to provide a framework to analyze the spatio-temporal aspects on the quantitative and qualitative levels. Now, as Madeleine was telling you, there are two layers: the semantic layer, which integrates and organizes all of the descriptors entered by the users, who are free to use the designated aspects of the image based on their use: archaeology, conservation, restoration, etc. And then you have a morphological layer with geometric and visual descriptors, and computed with the 3D descriptions that are also fed in by the users so that they can do the geometric and statistical analysis. There are enormous possibilities here for analysis. Here you have two users in different disciplines. By analyzing the overlapping of the geometric aspects, we try to work on the semantic level. Are they the same? Are they described differently? How will this allow us to provide synonyms in terms of vocabulary used? Or could we deduct certain aspects that may have different geometrics, but that are associated with the same concept? So by referencing this information, we will be able to analyze the co-occurrence of certain factors and the relationships between different phenomena. Here you can see an excerpt from what was done by T. Messaoud with the anthology in IOLI, Annotation of Images, to track conservation of these structures. He suggested that we work on the descriptors to be annotated based on a list of terms with different classes of terminology, such as materials, alterations, and building techniques. He demonstrated that by combining superposition of the images, the spatial and morphological aspects and annotation made it possible to have multidimensional relationships between these different areas, either by performing searches on one concept, finding the morphological and spatial trends for one object, or a multi-concept system with searches for different concepts to provide indications on spatial distribution of the type of alteration of an object made in a certain type of material. This made it possible using case studies to see what was done with the limestone, the damage to the limestone, and other materials that were being studied. Of course, this does not yet give us an indication of the causes for this damage, but it is interesting for conservation purposes. This is really exploratory work, but we're starting to think about what we could propose in the future for statistical analysis in this area. This leads to questions having to do with ergonomics, user-friendliness, the results of the analyses. You can see here a diagram that makes it possible to analyze how this overlaps with, as I was explaining, B09, C01 here are overlapped, and you can see where this is located on a chapel, for example, and you can see what is engraved. Of course, this is just one representation among others. There are so many interesting things to explore when it comes to representing the different analyses done on a complex level. The prospects I just explained very quickly were focused on the analysis of the annotations for a project, but when you have sufficient data on the platform, we could also get interested in wider analyses, much broader, by doing comparative analyses of collections of objects, or to explore data based on multi-criteria searches, matching spatial and temporal and semantic aspects. Say, for example, I want to know a list of all the projects that have this masonry work in the south of France that have shown this type of damage. Or you can collaborate. I'd like to meet other players working in this area of restoration. For example, I see I have very little time left, so I'm going to try to go even faster. On the bottom of my screen, you can see the work performed a few years ago by David Lopolelo and Antoine Lutkes on semiology of the forms, trying to formalize the characteristic signatures of these corpuses and the formal expression of the geometric aspects of the object related to the same concept. And here it was color. And here, one last point we've been working on has to do with the breakthrough between real and virtual life. We can see that the digital aspects when you're studying heritage are really taking over. It's become more and more important. And this depends, of course, on the area of work you're in. We're going from a situation where people were interpreting, representing everything at the same time, whereas you could do this in sequence remotely, thanks to digital copies. And even if the digital world can be very convincing and close to reality, we do lose data. We do lose information. There can be a discontinuity that can lead to certain problems. Faced with this aspect, we've been using augmented reality techniques with new annotation models. We've been doing this in situ, and it can help you acquire images. I can't go into all the details, but basically the difficulty with this case was Aioli is a web application, and so if people want to be mobile, that can be a slight issue. That's one aspect we're working on in order to allow users to use augmented reality for their annotations and load an Aioli project, for example, and make sure that it is aligned consistently with reality. There are more and more technical details, but we've been able to get over this problem, and we've been experimenting, and we're quite satisfied with the results so far, opening up new prospects for contextualization and assisting visualization, making it possible to see things that you can't see with the naked eye. This makes it possible for us to determine new working methodologies to produce knowledge based on digital data that has been semantically enriched. And finally, beyond the freedom this allows us for analysis purposes to work in situ, it does make us reconsider the idea of traceability. Of course, an integrated approach makes it possible to save a trace of any changes made to the data, the author or the type of media or anything, but it also makes it possible to understand the different mechanisms that lead users to find this or that phenomena. For example, this way of working will help us study the areas that most players are studying as themselves, or on the contrary, see that nothing matches in terms of the various interests of the researchers. And there are a lot of other things we can do along these lines. We can try to learn even more, not just about the object, but the relationship between the object and the researchers. I guess I'll stop here. I'm sorry, I was not able to speak fast enough to catch up time. Thank you so much for this presentation of the Aioli platform. It is so interesting, extremely interesting, and it definitely shows the amazing potential of this tool. Of course, like the audience, I'm sure I totally understood everything you had to say, and it allows you to document the object throughout time, how it was in the past, track damage currently or in the future. That is fascinating. The other collaborative aspect of this platform is also quite something. It's so user-friendly, as they say. And also, all of these developments you talked about last year are truly interesting. In your conclusion, you mentioned one point that does raise a number of issues. Aside the technical aspects, the relationship between the observer, the researcher, and the object being studied. This makes it possible to understand what different researchers see in the object. It can be different, and that is also very fascinating. We have just a few minutes left. I'm not sure if there are any questions from the audience yet. I don't believe so. But maybe Etienne Anheim, who's with us, does have a few questions in mind. And then I know he will be giving us his conclusions in just a few minutes. But in any case, thank you so much to both of you for this presentation. And thank you for making the effort to speak quickly in spite of the interpreting difficulties with your presentation going so fast. But congratulations, and congratulations to our interpreters. I realize how difficult this is. I'm looking again to see if we have any questions from the audience. No, not yet. So I would like maybe to take advantage of a few minutes remaining. If anyone would like to add a few points, or if you have more prospects you would like to mention in particular, because I can imagine all this comes at a cost.
Sur des chantiers très importants comme Notre-Dame de Paris, il y a aussi un investissement derrière qui doit être relativement conséquent.
Alors, je dirais que toutes les difficultés, elles reposent sur le fait de trouver un équilibre entre le fait de stabiliser des fonctionnalités qu'on est capable de proposer.
I'd say that the difficulty has to do with offering functionalities be used by the public at large. It's still keeping the perspective aspect and dealing with more remote prospects. So we have, it's difficult to make a platform lasting and disseminate it whilst being a small team only of researchers. But thank God we can have some support from other projects. To give you an order of magnitude, there are usually three or four people working at the same time on this platform. There's been a lot of turnover, but it's not very easy to manage this all these problems through a small team. I understand. I have a question here. Can you imagine a progressive documentation on the tools used for digitization by researchers, such as drones? Does that mean that it has to do with being able to integrate it in the platform? It says progressive documentation on tools. There are several problems. We integrate photogrammetry that includes drone images from drones, having to do with LIDAR and laser data. It's a question that we've been wondering. We'd like to integrate them. It's been done a bit for Notre Dame because the laser data we have, and we complete that, we supplement this with photogrammetry, and all this data is being studied. It's been looked into, but a number of questions arise. How do we orientate these pictures? I think that your picture illustrates what research is fundamentally, which means that every time you find something, you find a solution, new questions, new problems arise.
And it's the whole pleasure of research to go further and further. We always hope for an ending, but we also hope for some afterwards. Thank you for your answers. I think we'll have to stop here. And again, thank you very much for this very exciting presentation. And now we shall move to the conclusions for these 2 days symposium. Etienne and I will present them to you. He's the Director of Studies in the high school in social sciences, and he deals with the period between the 12th and the 16th period, and he's more interested in the social material and social history of painting, and also the history of written materials. Up until recently, he was the director of the research body, and he's one of the advisors for JPI, and I'd like to thank him for being very assiduously present in meetings about JPI cultural heritage. Etienne, the floor is yours for conclusions. Thank you very much, Charles. Hello, everybody. Can everybody hear me properly? I should like, first of all, to thank, through Charles, the organizers, men and women, for their invitation to conclude these meetings, and thanks for the presenters, for the speakers, which were, the works were fascinating, and they showed how dynamic intellectually they are, and they also showed what digital has contributed to research recently, and we saw the complementarity of heritage bodies and research teams. So the first review would underline real contribution, real innovations that we could identify over the previous years. I think that the thoughts that we heard show also in what conditions and with what precautions, inside which limits, digital can keep its word, so to speak, i.e. will be able to be a sort of new frontier for heritage connected issues. And the first thing that this meeting did was that it was more, speakers showed more concretely the connection between heritage and digital. It's all very complex because the work that were presented to us shows how plural the notion of digital as applied to heritage is. This helps us escape from slogans and trends. Sometimes these apply systematically to digital, which have to do with general knowledge and general statements, and all the people who work in the funding of research know how much digital is a key word that is used to advocate for projects which sometimes are very remote from the object of interest. What we saw was a huge project where there is progress, where there is the distinction, which goes through all the presentations. I couldn't list all the presentations even more, as they all have different aspects, and they connected these aspects to the use of digital. And this shows that very often when people talk about digitization, they talk about several things. We talk about a tool for use, or added value in a way, i.e. oriented towards the public at large. And we'd also talk about a curation tool for heritage. Also, when we say digital, we mean a fundamental research tool on heritage. for research on heritage. And I think this is an essential aspect of the meeting between digital and heritage. Of course, there is a social, political, economic issue, but also a strictly scientific issue, and we could measure the spin-offs. We can see that digital work on heritage enables advances in a number of fields of research, but also there is applied research and also real theoretical, reflexive, epistemological progress. We can underline the fact that heritage is not just a social value, but also an object that should be dwelt on by research from a digital point of view. And I think that in future, we should make sure that these projects can have a sort of feedback on research and on the funding mechanisms for research, and the fact that ANR and JPI associated themselves is a very good sign. This is all the more important as we're seeing the emergence of digital heritage as an object for research per se, i.e. we could think about augmented heritage assets, or sometimes digital-born heritage. It seems to me that there are a number of a new set of questions have been raised. The second large contribution of this symposium is to show obstacles and critical issues. First of all, I think that the obstacles come from research in the digital science itself and the way it can be applied to heritage assets. Often what was mentioned was the problem of interoperability and the signal processing, data processing, deep signal, IA, big data, AI, sorry, and big data. We could see that digital could be applied to ontology or prioritization of information. And Violette and Adeline illustrated this very well. Digital is huge. It has huge prospects, and it poses the problem of management of data and the creation of a digital heritage universe. These questions are not just technical, they are also social and political and epistemological. And this is one of the great points in this symposium, because it shed new light on this aspect. Heritageization is ongoing, and when it is done through digital, it relies on a number of choices with some biases and some drawbacks, which are connected to dead angles. And sometimes they have been underlined through researchers' approaches. What are these dead angles? There are social and political ones that have to do with matters that are heavily debated, public character of data, they reuse, open science, problems of copyright. There are these dead angles sometimes are deeper, because digital as applied to heritage brings about the problem of inequality and education that is being traded on digital, and the accessibility, for example, for people living with a handicap, or economically speaking, or sometimes there's an economic barrier, so people don't have the means. Also, heritage means some kind of family transmission, and in French, patrimoine has patriarchal connotations, and we can see that these matters lead to ideological notions which can be gendered. For example, there's still in the speakers a sort of a slight gender bias, and this shows that that heritage is not just a positive concept. And Gilles Passenac said so yesterday. He said heritage is not necessarily doesn't necessarily have a fantastic future. It is also a place for conflict and disagreement. And it is very good that you reminded us of these unmentioned. It will force us to take care of them. In a way, digital denaturalizes heritage and puts it remotely from us. It is not a neutral element, but it's also a social production, subconscious one sometimes, but researchers take part in this every day, and so do research funding bodies. And this prospect, which showed from project to project, is should help us against some fantasy of a total digitization of heritage. It would be a sort of one-to-one reproduction of the world. Actually, digital confronts us more to these biases, to this production and selection that we are carrying out. And in a sense, digital raises very old questions, i.e. selecting biosociety of what it wants to salvage and hand down, and entails a number of disciplines, museography, archivistics, and things like that. And this is an essential dialectic of past and present material and tangible and intangible. Yesterday, somebody reminded us that these artifacts are still real. We shouldn't substitute one real for another, but the huge resource, digital has a lot in store for us. And the research that is done on heritage and digital helps us against skepticism, but also some sort of naive scientism. What we call heritage science can be a place for building a reasoned and critical attitude, a special place for us to reflect on social value and scientific research at the service of a society that is supposed to be democratic and open and be lucid about themselves and their past. Thank you very much, and I'll give the floor back to Charles.
Belle, très stimulante conclusion et très brillante, j'ai envie de dire.
Thank you, Etienne, for these very good and brilliant conclusions, which put a very good end to these 2 days.
Thank you so much. What a great conclusion. And I would like to now thank all of the participants. Of course, our participants yesterday and speakers, as well as those this morning, and the presentation of the IOLI platform, as well as Mr. Anheim for his conclusions. I would also like to thank our interpreters. I know how difficult it is. I've interpreted myself, especially in these technical fields. So congratulations for your work, and thank you for being here and assisting us. I'd also like to thank the organizers of this seminar. I was thinking of ANR, JPI Cultural Heritage, the Ministry of Culture, and all of the other partners who have participated in making this successful. Sylvie, Vincent, Adeline, everybody here in our organizing committee, please accept my words of thanks. And then I would like to thank the many people that have attended this seminar for the last 2 days and for your attention to our discussions, as well as your involvement in the poster sessions. I think this seminar has been a great success. Thanks to you all, and I hope we can meet soon and in real life, because times are tough. Thank you very much. Goodbye.